They say a passport only proves where you were born. Mine proved that an entire civilization remembered a kindness my own world had forgotten. Ethan Walker had crossed more star systems than most people on Earth could name, yet nothing about the Ver 9 border terminal felt familiar. The station floated above a pale blue gas giant, its massive observation windows glowing with soft silver light that filtered through endless layers of clouds below. Every few seconds, another transport drifted toward the docking ring, guided by invisible tractor fields that hummed so quietly they sounded almost like distant singing. Travelers from dozens of worlds filled the enormous arrival hall. Towering reptilian merchants carried polished crystal cases. Small feathered diplomats hurried across the floor while translating devices floated beside their shoulders. Elegant blue-skinned citizens wearing dark ceremonial coats moved with effortless confidence through dedicated immigration lanes that stretched beneath shimmering holographic signs. Ethan adjusted the strap of his worn travel bag and stepped into the only line marked for emerging civilizations. He smiled to himself. It was difficult not to notice the difference. The premium lanes flowed smoothly while his line barely moved. The polished black floor reflected every overhead light so clearly that it almost looked like walking across still water. Somewhere above, invisible speakers announced arrivals in dozens of languages before repeating the message in perfect English. Welcome to the Xenoryth Protectorate. Please prepare your travel authorization and identity documents. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his weathered brown jacket and carefully touched the edge of his passport. It looked almost old-fashioned beside the glowing identity cubes everyone else carried. Dark blue leather, gold lettering, slightly worn corners from years of travel. Nothing about it appeared valuable. It was simply an Earth Republic passport issued 7 years earlier in Denver, Colorado. The woman behind him sighed loudly. She belonged to a species with smooth emerald skin and silver eyes that never seemed to blink. She glanced at Ethan's passport and frowned. "You still use printed documents?" she asked with polite confusion. Ethan laughed softly. "Sometimes old things last longer." She tilted her head as if the answer made very little sense. Before she could respond, another announcement echoed through the terminal. Lane 7. Proceed to inspection. Ethan stepped forward. Behind a curved desk stood an officer whose posture alone commanded silence. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, deep charcoal trimmed with silver lines that caught the light whenever she moved. Her skin carried the rich blue tone of a clear ocean before sunrise, and her white hair was pulled neatly behind her shoulders. Her name badge displayed only 2 words. Officer Xenoryth. She barely looked at Ethan when he approached. Her attention remained fixed on the glowing display floating beside her station. Citizenship. Her voice sounded calm, precise, almost mechanical. Ethan placed his passport on the counter. Earth Republic. She finally lifted her eyes. They settled briefly on his face before drifting downward toward the small booklet. There was no hostility in her expression. There was something colder. Indifference. She picked up the passport between 2 gloved fingers as though handling an outdated object from a museum. Purpose of visit? Maintenance contract. Orbital communications array. Estimated stay is 9 days. Employer? Helios Transit Systems. Her fingers moved across a transparent control panel suspended above the desk. Blue symbols flowed rapidly through the air. She scanned his travel history with practiced efficiency. Mars. Europa Station. Titan Colony. Lunar Gateway. Several civilian routes beyond the Sol system. Nothing remarkable. Around them, immigration officers welcomed ambassadors, business leaders, and decorated military officers with formal greetings. Ethan received only silence. A young alien child passing nearby stared curiously at the passport in Xenoryth's hand before being gently guided away by his mother. Ethan noticed the child wave. He smiled and waved back. The mother looked embarrassed, quickly lowering her eyes before disappearing into the crowd. Xenoryth inserted the passport into a narrow silver scanner built into the counter. Identity verification beginning, the station announced. Ethan folded his hands and waited. He had completed this process dozens of times across human space. It usually took less than 10 seconds. The scanner emitted a soft white glow. Then it stopped. Every light around the inspection booth faded at once. Conversations throughout the immigration hall slowly died away. The enormous terminal became so quiet that Ethan could hear the distant vibration of docking engines several hundred yards outside the reinforced glass. Lyra frowned for the first time. She removed the passport and examined its cover before placing it back into the scanner. "That is unusual," she whispered. A second later, the scanner illuminated again, but this time the light was not white. It was deep gold, ancient and brilliant, spilling across the polished floor like morning sunlight. One by one, every holographic display inside the terminal disappeared. A calm voice, older than the station itself, echoed through the vast arrival hall. "Royal Protocol 0 recognized. Verified Earthborn traveler detected. All immigration procedures suspended. Highest honor sequence initiating." No one moved. Not Ethan. Not the travelers. Not even Officer Lyra, whose calm expression vanished as the colors slowly drained from her face. The first lesson every traveler learns is that silence can be louder than an alarm. Ethan Walker remained perfectly still as the golden light continued to pour from the passport scanner, washing across the polished immigration hall until every reflection on the black floor shimmered like liquid sunlight. Hundreds of travelers stood frozen in place. Some stared at him. Others stared at the scanner itself, as though it had spoken with the voice of history instead of software. The ancient announcement repeated itself with calm precision. "Royal Protocol 0 confirmed. Priority honor sequence remains active." Officer Lyra slowly removed both of her gloves. Ethan noticed that movement before anything else because every gesture she had made until now had been exact and efficient. This one felt personal. She placed the gloves neatly on the counter, picked up his passport with both hands instead of 2 fingers, and lowered her head. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was careful, respectful, almost ceremonial. "Mr. Ethan Walker," she said quietly, "please accept my deepest apology for the delay." Ethan blinked. "Delay?" She nodded without lifting her eyes. "You should never have been placed in the standard inspection queue." He looked around the enormous terminal. Every immigration booth had stopped processing passengers. Officers across the hall stood silently beside their stations, waiting. Nobody spoke above a whisper. "I think there has been some kind of mistake," Ethan answered. "I am just here to repair a communications array." Lyra looked at him for the first time since the protocol activated. The distance in her silver eyes had disappeared, replaced by something closer to disbelief. "According to the Central Archive," she replied carefully, "there has been no mistake." She touched a small crystal resting beside the scanner. A holographic display unfolded into the air, not blue like the ordinary customs records, but glowing with soft gold. Every line of text appeared in an alphabet Ethan had never seen before. Symbols flowed across the screen like streams of light before automatically translating themselves into English. Authorization level, heritage honor. Status, Earthborn descendant. Access, unrestricted. Escort required. Ethan read the words twice. They still made no sense. "Earthborn descendant," he repeated. "That is, everybody from Earth." Lyra gave the smallest nod. "Exactly." Before Ethan could ask another question, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Not hurried, deliberate. For officers approached from opposite sides of the hall wearing uniforms trimmed with gold instead of silver. They stopped several feet behind Lyra without speaking. One of them placed a closed hand over his chest. The others mirrored the gesture in perfect synchronization. None of them looked at Ethan directly. They waited for Lyra to speak first. "Officer," one of them said quietly, "command requests immediate confirmation." Lyra kept her eyes on the passport. "Confirmation verified. Identity authentic. Confirmed. Protocol genuine." She inhaled slowly. Without question, a faint murmur spread through the waiting crowd. Ethan noticed travelers quietly stepping backward, creating an open circle around the inspection station. Nobody seemed frightened. They simply behaved as though invisible rules had suddenly changed. The emerald-skinned woman who had questioned his paper passport earlier looked completely different now. She lowered her head politely when Ethan glanced toward her. Even the young alien child waved again, this time with a wide smile before his mother gently encouraged him to remain still. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Can somebody please explain what is happening?" Lyra hesitated for the first time. Her composed expression suggested she was choosing every word with extraordinary care. Most citizens never learn about Royal Protocol Zero, she admitted. It has not been activated in over 2 centuries. Then why is it activating now? Because your passport carries an origin designation that cannot be separated from your species. Ethan frowned. It is only a passport. No, Veolyra answered softly. Today it became a key. She reached toward another console hidden beneath the counter. Instead of pressing a security alert, she entered a sequence that caused the walls surrounding the immigration booth to shift almost silently. Thin metallic panels folded away, revealing an elegant corridor illuminated by warm amber lights instead of the cold white glow of the public terminal. The hallway had been concealed behind ordinary station architecture all along. Ethan stared at the unexpected passage. Where does that go? Veolyra carefully returned his passport with both hands. To a place that has remained sealed for 214 Earth years. She paused, and for the first time since they had met, there was genuine emotion behind her steady voice. It has been waiting for someone exactly like you. Some doors are built to keep people out. Others exist because history refuses to be forgotten. Ethan Walker accepted the passport with both hands, more out of instinct than ceremony, then looked once more at the hidden corridor beyond the moving wall. Warm amber lights stretched into the distance, reflecting from polished stone unlike anything else inside the station. The public immigration hall behind him had been constructed from smooth black alloys and bright white composites. This passage felt older. The walls carried subtle carvings that resembled flowing rivers instead of circuits. Thin streams of golden light traveled beneath the floor as though the hallway itself remained alive. Ethan glanced back toward the travelers. Every person remained respectfully silent. Nobody rushed forward to see what was happening. Nobody lifted a recording device. Even curiosity appeared restrained by customs he did not understand. Is everyone really waiting because of me? He asked quietly. Officer Veolyra answered without hesitation. They are waiting because of what your arrival represents. Ethan sighed softly. I still do not know what that is. Veolyra stepped away from the inspection desk for the first time. Another officer immediately took her position without speaking, allowing normal immigration to resume for everyone except the lane Ethan had occupied. It was as though an invisible script had already been rehearsed centuries before either of them had been born. Please, Veolyra said. Walk with me. Ethan adjusted the strap of his travel bag and entered the hidden corridor. The air changed almost immediately. The temperature felt warmer by several degrees, carrying the faint scent of cedar and fresh rain instead of recycled station atmosphere. Hidden speakers played quiet, instrumental music built from unfamiliar instruments that somehow reminded him of old Earth orchestras. Every footstep echoed softly beneath the vaulted ceiling. The corridor curved gently until the sounds of the immigration terminal disappeared completely. Ethan finally spoke again. You keep calling this Royal Protocol Zero. Was Earth part of your empire a long time ago? Veolyra stopped walking and turned toward him with visible surprise. No. She smiled very slightly. The opposite. Ethan waited. The Xenoryth Protectorate did not even exist when the protocol was written. She extended one graceful hand toward the nearest wall. The carvings illuminated instantly, revealing a moving mural formed entirely from light. Ethan watched stars appear across the stone surface. Small points connected into familiar constellations before expanding into a rotating map of space. Countless systems glowed softly across the display. One tiny blue point stood near the outer edge. Earth. This archive does not record conquest, Veolyra explained. It records gratitude. The map slowly shifted. Another cluster of stars appeared deep beyond known human territory. Their color faded from brilliant white into dim gray. Long before our worlds established diplomatic relations, she continued, a catastrophic stellar collapse stranded millions of refugees between collapsing hyperspace routes. Ethan folded his arms. I have never heard about that. Neither have most citizens of the Protectorate. The moving stars changed again. A handful of tiny vessels emerged from the edge of the display. Their shapes looked primitive compared to modern spacecraft. Angular hulls, chemical propulsion signatures, Earth registry markings. Ethan leaned closer. Those are human ships. Cargo ships, Veolyra corrected gently. Civilian vessels carrying food, medicine, and engineering supplies. Not military? No. Her answer came almost proudly. They had no obligation to enter the disaster zone. Every navigation model advised them to turn away. Ethan watched the tiny ships continue forward anyway, so they ignored the warnings. Yes, Veolyra lowered her voice. They rescued strangers they had never met. The projection expanded again. Thousands of escape craft surrounded the little convoy. Human freighters slowed their own journeys, opened docking bays, transferred oxygen reserves, medical equipment, clean water, and enough supplies to keep entire refugee fleets alive until rescue finally arrived weeks later. Ethan stared quietly at the scene. It felt strangely familiar, even though he had never studied it. It reminded him of stories his grandfather used to tell about ordinary neighbors helping one another after hurricanes and blizzards back on Earth. Nobody asked whether someone deserved help first. They simply helped because they could. Who were the refugees? Ethan asked softly. Veolyra did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached toward the final section of the mural. The scattered refugee vessels gradually transformed into the emblem Ethan had already seen throughout the immigration terminal. The silver crest of the Xenoryth protectorate slowly appeared above the stars, glowing with quiet dignity. Veolyra looked directly into Ethan's eyes. They were my people, Mr. Walker. Before we had an empire. Before we had a home. Before history gave us a future. History rarely remembers the names of ordinary people. It remembers what they chose to do when nobody expected anything from them. Ethan Walker stood quietly before the glowing mural, watching the ancient convoy drift through silent space. The tiny cargo ships looked almost fragile compared to modern interstellar cruisers. Their hulls carried scratches. Their engines burned with outdated chemical exhaust. Yet they continued forward while every navigation prediction warned them to turn back. Veolyra stepped closer to the wall, and another section of the archive awakened beneath her fingertips. New images appeared with remarkable clarity. Hundreds of civilians moved through crowded cargo bays wrapped in thermal blankets. Human mechanics repaired unfamiliar alien life support systems using spare parts that clearly had not been designed to fit. Children from different species sat together on metal containers while exhausted volunteers served warm meals from portable field kitchens. There were no medals, no speeches, no banners celebrating heroes. Only people working because someone nearby needed help. Ethan found himself smiling without realizing it. That feels familiar, he admitted. Veolyra glanced toward him. You recognize these people? No. He shook his head slowly. But I recognize the attitude. She studied his expression with quiet curiosity. Please explain. Ethan looked back toward the projection. Back home, my grandfather used to tell me that when storms hit small towns, neighbors stopped asking whose fence belonged to whom. Everyone simply picked up a hammer and started rebuilding. Veolyra listened carefully, without expecting payment, most of the time, without legal obligation, usually. She remained silent for several seconds. Your species continues to surprise me. Ethan laughed softly. Believe me, we surprise ourselves too. The mural shifted once again. This time, individual records appeared beside several human ships. Names, registry numbers, cargo manifests, volunteer medical crews, civilian engineering teams. Ethan noticed something unusual. None of the documents referred to military command. Every decision had been made by independent captains who chose to delay profitable deliveries in order to rescue complete strangers. They risked everything, he murmured. Veolyra nodded. Several companies declared bankruptcy after the mission. Some captains never recovered financially. Ethan looked down at the floor. Then why did they do it? Veolyra answered with surprising confidence. According to every surviving journal we recovered, they all wrote some version of the same sentence. She touched another glowing symbol. A single handwritten line appeared above the stars in carefully translated English. If we were the ones drifting out there, we would hope someone came for us. Ethan felt something tighten quietly inside his chest. The sentence was so simple that it almost disappeared beneath its own honesty. No complicated philosophy. No political slogan. Just empathy. The archive continued unfolding. New generations appeared. Refugee settlements became permanent cities. Temporary shelters transformed into universities, observatories, hospitals, and eventually the capital world of the growing protectorate. Every generation added another stone to a civilization that had survived because strangers refused to look away. Our children studied those journals, Veolyra said softly. Every student learns that our civilization received a second beginning from people who asked for nothing in return. Ethan folded his arms. Then why have humans never heard this story? Veolyra's expression became thoughtful. Because your ancestors never requested recognition. She allowed the silence to settle between them before continuing. When diplomatic relations were finally established generations later, many of the original records had already been forgotten on your side. Entire governments changed. Archives disappeared. Priorities shifted. Ethan looked toward the little convoy again. So Earth moved on. Yes. Her voice remained gentle. But we did not. A quiet chime echoed through the corridor. Somewhere beyond the hidden walls, the station continued welcoming thousands of travelers. Yet inside the archive, time itself felt slower. Veolyra reached into a small compartment beneath the mural and carefully removed an object wrapped in dark blue cloth. She unfolded it with deliberate precision. Resting inside lay a polished metallic emblem no larger than the palm of Ethan's hand. It resembled the silver crest displayed throughout the station, except one corner contained a tiny engraving of an old Earth cargo vessel. Every immigration commander carries one of these, she explained. We are taught that if another Earthborn ever activates Royal Protocol 0, this emblem must be presented before any questions are asked. Ethan stared at the symbol in disbelief. You actually expected someone like me to arrive? Veolyra smiled, not with excitement, but with quiet certainty. Not expected. She carefully held the emblem over her heart. Prepared. There is an important difference. Before Ethan could answer, the soft amber lights surrounding the corridor dimmed for just a moment, and a calm voice resonated from hidden speakers. Senior Council representative approaching the Hall of Gratitude. Arrival in 60 seconds. Veolyra inhaled slowly, then looked at Ethan with an expression that carried both respect and caution. The people you are about to meet have waited their entire careers for this moment. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are not hidden behind locked doors. They are hidden behind traditions that no one has questioned for generations. The amber corridor opened into a circular chamber so vast that Ethan Walker instinctively slowed his pace. The ceiling arched nearly 100 feet overhead, supported by graceful columns that resembled living trees carved from pale crystal. Soft streams of golden light flowed through the floor in intricate patterns, converging beneath a massive sculpture suspended in the center of the room. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary cargo ship. Then Ethan recognized the unmistakable outline of an old Earth freighter, recreated in polished silver with astonishing attention to detail. Every dent, every cargo container, every external antenna had been preserved exactly as it appeared in the historical archive. The ship did not dominate the chamber because of its size. It commanded attention because everything else had been built around it. Quiet footsteps echoed from the opposite entrance. 5 figures entered without ceremony, their formal robes trimmed with deep sapphire rather than military silver or administrative gold. They were older than anyone Ethan had seen since arriving at the station. Their movements carried the calm confidence of people who no longer needed to prove their authority. The individual walking in front paused several feet away and placed one open hand over his heart. His blue skin had faded into a lighter shade with age, while delicate silver markings traced elegant patterns across his temples. Welcome, he said in smooth English. My name is Chancellor Xenoryth. It is an honor beyond words to finally greet an Earthborn guest within the Hall of Gratitude. Ethan shifted awkwardly. I appreciate the welcome, but I think everyone expects more from me than I can actually give. A warm smile crossed the Chancellor's face. That answer alone explains why the protocol still exists. Ethan blinked. I do not understand. The Chancellor slowly walked toward the silver freighter. The captains who saved our ancestors never believed they had done anything extraordinary. He rested his fingertips lightly against the polished hull. History judged them differently. The chamber remained perfectly still. No cameras hovered nearby. No reporters waited outside. There was only quiet respect. Ethan noticed dozens of engraved names surrounding the sculpture. Some belonged to human captains. Others identified engineers, medics, cooks, mechanics, communication specialists, and even civilian volunteers. None of the inscriptions mentioned rank or social status. Every contribution had been preserved with equal care. You recorded everyone, Ethan whispered. Every person we could identify, the chancellor replied. Not because they were famous, because every life mattered. Veolyra stepped silently beside Ethan. There are still names we have never recovered. Ethan slowly circled the monument. His eyes settled on a small bronze plaque mounted near the base. Unlike the elegant alien script surrounding it, this inscription appeared in plain English. It had clearly been copied from one of the surviving journals. We did not save aliens today. We saved families. Ethan read the sentence twice before quietly exhaling. That sounds exactly like something an ordinary person would write. Precisely, the chancellor answered. Civilizations are rarely transformed by extraordinary people. They are transformed when ordinary people refuse to ignore suffering. Ethan stood silently for a long moment. The room felt less like a museum and more like a promise preserved across centuries. Finally, he asked the question that had been lingering in his mind ever since the scanner activated. If your people remember us this way, why has nobody from Earth ever been invited here? The Chancellor exchanged a brief glance with Veolyra before answering. Because Royal Protocol 0 was never designed as an invitation. He slowly turned toward the towering windows overlooking the blue gas giant below. It was designed as a safeguard. Ethan frowned. Against what? Against forgetting. The Chancellor folded his hands behind his back. As our civilization grew stronger, wealthier, and more influential, our founders feared that future generations might begin measuring worth by power instead of character. They worried we would someday admire crowns more than compassion. His eyes returned to Ethan. So they created a living reminder. Any citizen born on Earth who arrived carrying authentic identification would automatically activate the oldest honor code in our government. Not because every human is royalty, but because every Earthborn traveler reminds us where our future truly began. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the passport resting quietly in his hand. It looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. The leather remained worn. The corners remained scuffed. Nothing about its appearance suggested importance. Yet somehow it had carried an entire civilization's memory farther than history itself. Before anyone could speak again, another soft chime echoed through the Hall of Gratitude. This one sounded different. Sharper. More urgent. A young attendant entered quickly, stopped beside the Chancellor, and respectfully lowered her voice. Your Excellency, she said. Lord Marcellus of the High Assembly has requested immediate access. He insists the protocol should be suspended until the visitor's status is reviewed. The peaceful silence inside the chamber changed almost imperceptibly. Veolyra's calm expression hardened for the first time since Ethan had met her. The Chancellor simply closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. Then, he said quietly, the old lesson is about to be tested by the new generation. The easiest way to erase a debt is to convince yourself it never existed. The great doors of the Hall of Gratitude opened with a quiet mechanical whisper, and every conversation stopped before a single word was spoken. Lord Marcellus entered without haste, dressed in an immaculate white ceremonial coat bordered with shimmering platinum thread. His posture was flawless. His silver hair was carefully arranged behind his shoulders, and the polished insignia resting over his chest reflected the warm light of the chamber like a mirror. He represented a generation that had grown up surrounded by prosperity rather than survival. Four attendants followed several steps behind him, each carrying slim data tablets instead of ceremonial emblems. Their movements were efficient, almost corporate, a sharp contrast to the quiet reverence Ethan had witnessed only moments earlier. Marcellus acknowledged Chancellor Saren with a polite inclination of his head before allowing his gaze to settle upon Ethan. His expression remained perfectly controlled, but something in his eyes measured, rather than welcomed. So, he said calmly, this is the traveler. Chancellor Saren nodded. His identity has been confirmed through Royal Protocol 0. Marcellus folded his hands behind his back. I have already reviewed the preliminary report. His eyes shifted briefly toward the worn Earth passport resting in Ethan's hand. An interesting historical artifact. Ethan forced a small smile. It is mostly useful for getting through airports. No one laughed except Veolyra, whose quiet smile disappeared almost immediately when Marcellus turned toward her. Officer Veolyra, he asked evenly, did you independently verify the authentication sequence? Yes, my lord. Twice. Twice. External interference? None detected. Marcellus gave a slow nod. Then the technology functions correctly. He began walking around the silver monument, studying the engraved names with detached precision, which leaves us with a philosophical question rather than a technical one. Ethan remained silent. Something told him this conversation had been unfolding inside the Protectorate for years before his arrival. Marcellus finally stopped beside the bronze plaque bearing the simple English sentence. "We did not save aliens today. We saved families." He read the words quietly before speaking again. "History deserves respect," he said. "But history must not become permanent government policy." The chamber felt noticeably cooler. Chancellor Saren answered without raising his voice. "Compassion is not a temporary policy. Neither is reason," Marcellus replied. "Our founders honored a remarkable act performed by courageous civilians over 2 centuries ago. No one disputes that." He turned toward Ethan. "However, this gentleman did not command those rescue vessels. He was not present during those events. He has contributed nothing to our civilization beyond arriving with the correct birthplace." Ethan appreciated the honesty, even if it stung slightly. "You are not wrong," he admitted. Veilira looked at him with visible surprise. Marcellus noticed it as well. "A practical answer," he observed. "Then perhaps you understand my concern." Ethan considered the question before speaking. "Honestly, I am still trying to understand why everyone keeps treating me like I accomplished something my ancestors did." Marcellus spread one hand gently. "Exactly." His voice remained calm, almost persuasive. "Gratitude toward history is admirable. Blind privilege inherited across generations is something entirely different." The attendants behind him quietly activated their tablets. Graphs and legal documents floated above the transparent screens. Ethan noticed references to budget reviews, diplomatic revisions, and proposed amendments. This debate had clearly been prepared long before his unexpected arrival. Chancellor Saren stepped beside the silver freighter. "The protocol never granted privilege." Marcellus raised an eyebrow. "It suspends ordinary immigration law. Temporarily. It grants unrestricted access. For educational purposes. It requires government escort. For ceremonial continuity." Marcellus looked directly at Ethan again. "And what if someone one day decides to abuse that trust?" The question lingered in the chamber. Ethan glanced down at his passport. It suddenly felt heavier than paper should. He thought about the cargo captains in the archive. They had never expected statues. They certainly had never expected strangers centuries later arguing over their choices. Finally, Ethan looked back at Marcellus. "If I may ask something, please. Those people who rescued your ancestors." Ethan nodded toward the silver ship. "Did anyone inspect their motives before accepting the food and medical supplies?" Marcellus remained silent. Ethan continued quietly. "Or did someone simply decide that helping was enough?" No one spoke for several long seconds. Even the attendants stopped looking at their floating reports. Veilira lowered her eyes, while Chancellor Saren watched Ethan with quiet satisfaction. Marcellus did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly closed one of the digital documents hovering before him. His expression softened by only the smallest degree, yet it was enough to reveal that the conversation had shifted somewhere neither side had expected. The strongest traditions survive not because they are written into law, but because someone chooses to live by them when it becomes inconvenient. Lord Marcellus studied Ethan Walker without speaking, the silence stretching through the hall of gratitude until even the gentle music beneath the crystal floor seemed to fade into the background. The floating legal documents beside his attendants slowly dimmed, waiting for instructions that did not immediately come. Finally, Marcellus gave a measured nod. "Your question is fair," he admitted. "No one inspected the intentions of those captains before accepting their assistance. Survival allowed no luxury for philosophical debate." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes life works that way." Marcellus looked toward the silver freighter suspended above the chamber. "Perhaps. Yet governments are expected to think beyond moments of crisis." Chancellor Saren walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the swirling blue clouds below the station. His reflection blended with the endless atmosphere outside, making him appear almost transparent against the distant planet. "Governments," he said quietly, "also decide which stories deserve to survive." Veilira remained beside Ethan, her posture formal but noticeably more relaxed than before. She had spent most of her career enforcing regulations with absolute consistency. Today she had watched regulations give way to memory. The experience had clearly changed something inside her. Before anyone continued the discussion, a gentle tone echoed from the entrance. Another attendant stepped carefully into the chamber, carrying a small wooden case rather than a digital tablet. The contrast immediately caught Ethan's attention. Everything else inside the hall represented advanced civilization. The box looked handcrafted, its polished walnut surface marked with tiny imperfections that suggested it had been touched by many hands over many years. The attendant bowed respectfully toward Chancellor Saren. Archivist Lorian requested this be delivered immediately. Saren accepted the box with unusual care. His expression softened before he slowly opened the lid. Inside rested several sheets of yellowed paper protected beneath transparent preservation glass. Ethan leaned forward. Instinctively, they were handwritten documents. Real ink. Real paper. Saren lifted the top page and smiled almost nostalgically. These arrived with the first diplomatic delegation from Earth 170 years ago, he explained. At the time, no one realized what they were. Ethan looked closer. The handwriting appeared hurried, uneven in places, exactly like notes someone might scribble during a long shift. What is it? He asked. A copy of a maintenance journal. Saren carefully rotated the page so Ethan could read it. Most of the entries described ordinary repairs. Engine filters replaced. Oxygen valves inspected. Cargo seals reinforced. Then one sentence near the bottom immediately caught Ethan's eye. We are running 3 days behind schedule, but every family we carried made it safely to the relief fleet. Worth every extra hour. Ethan read the sentence twice. Then he quietly laughed. That sounds like every maintenance report I have ever written. Veilira looked surprised. Really? Absolutely. We complain about delays, then write one sentence that reminds everybody why the delay happened. Marcellus stepped closer, studying the journal over Ethan's shoulder. There is no speech about honor, he observed. No declaration of heroism. Because they probably did not think they were heroes, Ethan replied. They were workers trying to finish the job. The simplicity of the answer settled gently across the chamber. One of the younger attendants lowered his tablet completely, his attention now focused on the handwritten journal instead of legal revisions. Saren carefully replaced the document inside the wooden case. This is why the protocol was never connected to bloodlines, wealth, or political office, he explained. It was connected to birthplace because our founders believed culture shapes instinct. They hoped every generation born on Earth would continue teaching ordinary kindness in ordinary moments. Ethan shook his head gently. I wish I could promise that. Can you? Marcellus asked. Ethan looked down at the old passport resting in his hand before answering. No civilization is perfect. Earth certainly is not. We disagree. We make mistakes. We forget our own history more often than we should. He looked toward the silver freighter. But I still believe most people would stop to help someone stranded on the side of the road. Whether that road is in Colorado or somewhere between the stars. Veilira smiled quietly. Perhaps that is exactly the answer our founders expected. At that moment another announcement sounded throughout the hall, softer than the earlier alerts, but impossible to ignore. Incoming civilian shuttle requesting emergency docking assistance. Passenger documentation incomplete. Customs authorization pending. The room fell silent once again. Ethan noticed the brief exchange of glances between Marcellus and Saren. The Chancellor looked toward the ceiling thoughtfully before turning back to the group. How remarkable, he murmured. It appears history has decided to ask all of us another question before today's lesson is finished. The true measure of a tradition is revealed when it costs something to uphold it. The announcement echoed through the Hall of Gratitude one final time before fading into silence. Incoming civilian shuttle requesting emergency docking assistance. Passenger documentation incomplete. Customs authorization pending. Ethan Walker looked toward the towering windows as a small transport slowly appeared beyond the station's docking ring. Compared to the luxurious diplomatic cruisers arriving throughout the day, the little vessel looked tired. Its silver paint had faded under years of solar radiation, and one maneuvering thruster pulsed unevenly as automated guidance systems carefully guided it toward a maintenance berth. Lord Marcellus broke the silence first. Standard procedure requires temporary holding until identity verification is complete. Chancellor Saren folded his hands calmly. Standard procedure also allows discretionary review. Marcellus inclined his head. By unanimous authorization. Saren smiled faintly. Then perhaps we should review together. Within minutes the group arrived at an observation gallery overlooking Customs Dock 12. The wide glass wall offered a clear view of the docking platform below. Engineers connected service lines while medical personnel waited nearby with portable diagnostic equipment. The atmosphere remained orderly, yet Ethan sensed an unusual tension. No one seemed worried about danger. They were worried about making the correct decision. A customs supervisor approached carrying a digital report. The vessel originates beyond mapped trade routes, she explained. Navigation systems partially failed during transit. The pilot possesses valid identification, but one passenger has no recognized travel documentation. Marcellus accepted the report. Species: juvenile refugee. Estimated age approximately 10 Earth years. Ethan quietly looked through the glass as the transport hatch opened. A middle-aged pilot stepped onto the platform first, exhausted but composed. Moments later, a small blue-skinned child appeared beside him wearing an oversized gray jacket that had clearly belonged to an adult. The child clutched a faded cloth backpack with both hands and looked around the enormous station with uncertain eyes. Ethan immediately recognized the expression. It was not fear. It was the quiet confusion of someone entering a place where everyone else already understood the rules. "Where are the child's parents?" Ethan asked softly. The supervisor lowered her eyes. According to the pilot, they disappeared during a colony evacuation several months ago. The words settled heavily across the observation room. Veolyra watched the child in complete silence. Then, almost unconsciously, she glanced toward the silver emblem still resting over her heart. Ethan noticed the movement. So did Chancellor Saren. Marcellus continued reading the report carefully. The law requires identity verification before unrestricted entry. Ethan nodded. That makes sense. Marcellus looked at him with mild surprise. You agree? Of course. Rules exist for a reason. Ethan kept watching the child below. But rules are supposed to help people, not replace them. The pilot knelt beside the young traveler and gently adjusted the loose jacket before saying something that could not be heard through the observation glass. The child nodded bravely, then looked up toward the towering customs building. With quiet determination, Ethan smiled sadly. He reminds me of my nephew on his first day of school. Veolyra finally spoke. The archive described children like that. Ethan turned toward her. What do you mean? The refugee fleets. Her voice became almost reflective. Our ancestors arrived carrying small bags because everything else had been left behind. She looked down at the child again. History does not always repeat itself with starships. Sometimes it repeats itself with a single traveler. The observation room fell silent. Chancellor Saren slowly removed the preserved journal from its wooden case and placed it on the nearby table without opening it. He did not need to. Everyone already remembered the sentence written inside. If we were the ones drifting out there, we would hope someone came for us. Marcellus closed the digital report. His expression remained thoughtful rather than conflicted. The child will still require legal processing, he said. Naturally, Saren replied. But legal processing and human dignity have never been enemies. Ethan unexpectedly chuckled. Back home, my mother always said paperwork could wait until after someone had dinner. Veolyra smiled. Your mother sounds remarkably wise. Marcellus looked through the glass once more. The young traveler had noticed the waiting medical team and hesitated uncertainly. Without saying a word, Veolyra quietly removed her formal officer's jacket, handed it to Ethan to hold for a moment, then walked toward the exit. Where are you going? Ethan asked. She paused at the doorway. To greet our newest visitor before anyone asks for documents. She disappeared into the corridor with calm, confident steps. Several seconds later, everyone inside the observation room watched through the glass as the blue-skinned officer approached the child, lowered herself to one knee so they stood at the same height, and offered nothing more complicated than a warm smile and an open hand. No speeches were given. No protocol was announced. Yet as Ethan watched that simple gesture unfold beneath the bright station lights, he realized the oldest tradition inside the Protectorate had never truly depended on a passport. It had always depended on someone choosing kindness first. The greatest monuments are not carved from stone. They are carried quietly inside the choices ordinary people make when no one is keeping score. Ethan Walker stood beside the observation window for several long moments, watching Officer Valyra guide the young refugee through Customs Dock 12 with patient, unhurried steps. She did not rush the child toward scanners or inspection terminals. Instead, she matched the youngster's pace exactly, answering quiet questions with the same calm respect she had once reserved only for formal diplomatic guests. The oversized gray jacket still hung loosely from the child's shoulders, but somehow it no longer looked quite so heavy. Chancellor Saren folded the old journal closed and gently returned it to its wooden case. "Our founders understood something that is easy to forget," he said softly. "Kindness survives only when every generation chooses it again." Lord Marcellus remained silent as he watched the scene unfolding below. After several moments, he slowly deactivated every legal document still floating above his attendants' tablets. One by one, the glowing screens faded until only the reflection of the docking bay remained visible in the polished glass. The younger attendants exchanged surprised glances, but said nothing. Marcellus finally turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker." Ethan looked up. "Yes. Earlier today, I questioned whether history should continue influencing modern government." Ethan nodded. "You did." Marcellus smiled, though this time it lacked the careful distance that had marked every previous conversation. "I believe I asked the wrong question." Ethan waited. "The better question," Marcellus continued, "is whether modern government still deserves the history it inherited." The room grew quiet again. Even Chancellor Saren seemed content to let the silence carry the weight of those words. Ethan looked down at the worn passport, still resting comfortably in his hand. Its leather cover had not changed. The faded gold lettering remained scratched from years of ordinary travel. Tomorrow it would still fit inside the same jacket pocket it had. Always occupied. Nothing about the object itself had become extraordinary. Only the story attached to it had changed. "May I ask for one favor?" Ethan said. Saren smiled. "Anything within our ability." Ethan looked through the observation window toward the child below, now sitting comfortably with medical staff, while someone handed over a warm meal and a fresh cup of water. "Please do not remember Earth because of me." Saren tilted his head slightly. "Explain." "Remember us because of people like those cargo crews." Ethan nodded toward the silver monument visible through the open doors leading back toward the Hall of Gratitude. "Mechanics, pilots, nurses, cooks, the people who never expected anyone to build statues." Valyra had returned quietly to the observation room without Ethan noticing. She heard every word. "We already do," she said gently. "That has always been the point." Marcellus walked toward the window one final time. "Royal Protocol 0 will remain unchanged," he announced calmly. His attendants looked visibly surprised. "However, I will recommend one addition during the next assembly session." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of addition?" Marcellus watched the child laughing softly with one of the station engineers below. "Every customs officer in the Protectorate will study the journals from the rescue convoy before receiving authority to inspect travelers." He glanced toward Valyra. "Laws explain what we must do. Stories remind us why." Valyra placed one hand over the silver emblem resting above her heart. "I would be honored to teach the first class." Saren quietly laughed. "Then our founders would likely consider today a success." Several hours later, Ethan finally stepped back into the public terminal carrying the same travel bag and the same passport with which he had arrived that morning. Thousands of travelers continued moving beneath the vast ceiling, unaware that history had quietly shifted behind hidden walls only a short walk away. His maintenance contract still awaited him. The communications array still needed repairs. Life, in all its ordinary simplicity, continued forward. As Ethan approached the station exit, he noticed the young refugee from Dock 12 sitting near a wide observation window, carefully drawing stars on a digital sketch pad while wearing a clean station jacket that fit much better than the oversized one from before. The child looked up, recognized Ethan, and smiled. Ethan smiled back and gave a small wave before continuing toward the shuttle platform. He never asked whether the child knew who he was. It did not matter. Outside, The blue gas giant filled the sky with endless bands of light that reflected across the station's glass like gentle waves on a quiet ocean. Ethan slipped the passport into his pocket and took one last look at the stars before boarding his shuttle. Somewhere beyond those distant lights, centuries earlier, a few ordinary people had chosen to help strangers because it simply felt like the right thing to do. They never imagined an empire would remember them. They never imagined their kindness would outlive their names. But perhaps that was the quiet miracle of being human. The people history remembers are not always the ones who seek greatness. Sometimes they are simply the ones who stop long enough to leave the universe a little kinder than they found it.